What's up, people? I'm Erica of the Cocktails and Capitalism podcast, and today I'm joined by an abolitionist organizer named Micah Herskind, who's been involved with and written extensively about the movement to stop Cop City. Before I let Micah introduce himself, I wanted to let you all know that I'm going to be sipping on the Stop Cop City cocktail, which is made of blueberry shrub, whiskey, and soda water, or whatever kind of hard alcohol you want to use in this. The drink was crafted by the show's resident anti-capitalist bartender, Jesse Torres, in honor of the decentralized movement against the planned $90 million corporate-backed police urban warfare training facility known as Cop City. Micah, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So stoked to have you on the show. I've been following your work for a while and really excited to actually finally connect with you. So very excited.
Thank you.
Can you tell a little bit about yourself and your involvement in the movement?
Yeah, for sure. I'm an organizer and a writer. Have been, writing about the movement for a while now. I think anytime you say that, what I always want to make really clear about the movement, it is this incredibly decentralized movement that is really made up of so many different people. And, I know that different people see different people's faces at different times as, who's doing the podcast, who's talking. But, I always just want to be clear, just how many people are involved in this movement, whose names you will never know. Mm-hmm. And, just always lift them up too.
Yeah. And that's especially important to highlight the decentralized nature of this movement, given that we're talking about the RICO charges, which are trying to paint the movement as an organized criminal enterprise, which is absurd and absolutely insane. But yeah, I don't know if you want to share anything else about yourself or if you just want to dive into talking about the RICO stuff.
Yeah, let's do it. I forgot to say I'm also a law student, but
cool.
we don't talk about that so much. But we do need lawyers. Speaking of these RICO charges, the state, I know we're about to talk about it more, but the state is really sort of coming at people in the movement with everything that they have. And we need good movement lawyers to defend people from these political prosecutions. Yeah. So I hope that if any Georgia attorneys are watching, they will reach out to the Southern Center for Human Rights and help represent folks.
That's awesome. Hell yeah. And I'm so glad that you are in that field and so involved in this movement, because that is a key component here, understanding all of the legal implications of being involved in this movement and all the consequences that people are facing, which are absurd. But yeah, so let's just dive into talking about RICO. The same grand jury who indicted Trump has indicted 61 people with RICO charges for their alleged involvement in the movement to stop Cop City. I was just hoping that you could kind of give some of the basic details about these RICO charges and where they're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. So big picture, RICO is, a statute that was first created at the federal level and then a bunch of states adopted sort of state level versions. And it's basically a criminal statute that is used to group people together for, criminal charges, basically in one case. And sort of like the stated theory of why it was first created was that it was a way for prosecutors to, when they were going after the mafia, this is sort of the story, is a way to connect sort of low-level people carrying out the crimes with, the so-called mob bosses. And, of course, people at the time, people in the years since, and of course now, warned that this tool that can be used to group a bunch of people together under a so-called conspiracy, if they're framed to be as part of the same organization that is furthering some goal through, alleged criminal acts, people, of course, knew that that was going to be, weaponized against the left. That's going to be weaponized against people fighting for justice. And that's happened before, and it's what's happening now. So, this indictment is of 61 people. Basically, the theory or the fabrication that the prosecution, that the state attorney general is setting out is that the Stop Cop City movement is made up of this organization called Defend the Atlanta Forest. And, just right there, that's false. There is no organization called Defend the Atlanta Forest. There's a Twitter account that has that name. That's a phrase that a lot of people use because people want to defend the Atlanta Forest. Mm-hmm. That's not an organization. The prosecution's theory is that there's this DTAF organization that is conspiring to commit violent crimes in order to stop Cop City. And, it's supposedly this centralized mob-like structure where, their allegation is that organizers who are part of a bail fund, the Atlanta Solidarity Fund, which bails people out of jail when they are criminalized for protesting. Their theory is that these people are at the center of this criminal enterprise, and together they are trying to stop Cop City through these violent means. And when you read the indictment, which everyone should do, it's stunning, what they lay out. So, what they say in this indictment is that DTAF is this anarchist gang, essentially this anarchist enterprise, and it believes in things like mutual aid and social solidarity and collectivity. And it's saying these things as if like these are things everyone should be really scared of. Jesus. And, these are these violent anarchists who, in this organization are coming for the very foundations of, American society, which American society status quo is racialized, violent capitalism. So
we do want change.
To say that, right, trying to transform the status quo is a good thing. But, this theory that they're laying out, that this is some like centralized anarchist gang, and that the state should be criminalizing acts of mutual aid and solidarity. It's really, they're showing their cards very clearly of what they view as a threat to the state. And what they view as a threat to the state is solidarity and people taking care of each other and people refusing to leave each other behind. That they are saying that, they find that threatening.
Yeah, that is so insane. And that was the next thing I want to ask you about, just like the language in the actual indictment about mutual aid and solidarity. So do you think that if these RICO charges were to stick, and I know that that is very, very, very unlikely, but that would set in stone that these things are like criminal acts, right? Is you know more about law than me? So.
Yeah, and I'm only 2 weeks into law school, so it's still early.
Cheers to that.
But yeah, right. So this is their way of defining the organization, the enterprise, because, for this statute, you have to show that there's, this enterprise, this conspiracy that people have, entered into in some way. And the pillars of the organization, they're saying, is this sort of anarchist, pro-environmentalist, anti-police, anti-government philosophy that is defined by, mutual aid and solidarity. And so, you read this, here's a line from the indictment. Social solidarity is another term that is embraced by anarchists that is tied closely to mutual aid and collectivism. They're like, putting out this screed on, what these terms are, again, with the implication that, these are things to be criminalized. And these are the things that show evidence of a conspiracy, rather than, things like mutual aid. We just saw throughout the pandemic how the government, completely abandoned people to die, right? Mm-hmm. And, people came together to care for each other. And, mutual aid, I think, has always been practiced, but, really took off in that time as people saw the government is abandoning people to premature death. And, people do need to take care of each other. And here the state is saying, like, no, actually, that's unacceptable, and shows a conspiracy.
The reverberations with the repression of the lunch programs by the Black Panther Party, by mutual aid efforts back in the day. I mean, this is kind of a continuation of that, but like an enhancement of that as well.
Right.
Yeah, it's very, very scary and shocking for folks on the left. I mean, it does read like an indictment of anarchism in general,
Right.
Absurdity. Well, I was wondering, how does this indictment also target the broader movement to defund and abolish the police?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's such an important question. There's this fascinating thing in the indictment where it's talking about this enterprise, the Defend the Atlanta Forest enterprise. And it says that this movement, this enterprise, actually formed in 2020 on the day that George Floyd was murdered by the police. And that's stunning for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that that was March 2020. Cop City was not announced until the following spring. It was another whole year before Cop City was even announced. So how can an organization form to fight something that won't even be announced for the next year? And so I think that actually, if you go to that, you can see like, this is not just them trying to attack the Stop Cop City movement. This is them saying the day that abolition and, anti-capitalist action became popular, the day that people took to the streets and started burning cop cars and smashing windows and, making the stakes very clear, that is the day that, they're saying it all started. That's when the enterprise started. And they're pretty blatantly saying, our target is not just people fighting to stop Cop City. Our target is any abolitionist, anarchist, socialist organizer anywhere who's fighting to transform the system. Because again, how can an organization form to fight something that won't be announced for a whole nother year? This is, just sort of evidence that they know that they're fabricating this enterprise. They know it's a fabrication, and they're going to try to get away with it.
It's a fabrication, and the grounds that they are pointing to, the actual crimes are so flimsy and so absurd. I don't know if you want to touch on that just briefly to give people an idea of the mud on the shoes at a concert, you're charged with domestic terrorism.
Right. I mean, yeah. So from the very beginning, they've made clear that they're going to use really obscene criminal charges for any action, or even any action that they can't prove that they have no evidence of. So, one of the prime examples, of course, is March 5th, 2023. People were attending a music festival in the Weelaunee Forest where they're trying to build Cop City. And over a mile away, an action happened where some construction equipment was burned. And instead of showing up to that site, police showed up to the music festival and indiscriminately made mass arrests and charged people with domestic terrorism for just being in the forest. And the type of evidence that the judges and the prosecutors used to initially deny bond for those people was, well, they had mud on their shoes and their pants were wet. And, all of this shows that they were part of it. Mm-hmm. And, it's not just the domestic terrorism charges. It's, the bail fund organizers who have already been charged with money laundering and charity fraud for, again, operating a bail fund. There have been 3 people who were given felony charges for passing out flyers with the information of the police officers who murdered Tortuguita on it. And so basically what the indictment does is it pulls together so many of these charges and a couple more that were already political prosecutions. Mm-hmm. They're already these blatant political prosecutions where there isn't evidence for these things. And it groups them all under one thing, enhances the potential penalties, and I think importantly, sets up the state to group more people into mm-hmm. this RICO charge. Mm-hmm. And I just want to note that, so originally on these cases, on many of these domestic terrorism cases, it was both the Attorney General's office and it was the DeKalb County District Attorney, so sort of state and more local. Several months ago, the DeKalb County District Attorney, Sherry Boston, removed her office from all of these cases and basically said, I don't see the evidence to move forward on these charges. And so, I'm never going to say a nice thing about a prosecutor, but even a prosecutor, which is just another cop, has said there's not evidence to move forward on these. And so, that the Attorney General is not doing this because, he thinks that there's a really good case. He's doing it to try to ruin people's lives, to scare people from, joining the movement, and to set, to try to set a precedent elsewhere of if you resist, we're going to come after you with the full force of the law. Mm-hmm.
And even if these charges don't stick, they will ruin lives, make things so much harder for the people being charged, make it harder to get jobs, so many things. They will be affected.
Apartments, school, people have had their bank accounts canceled and closed.
Oh my God.
There are so many consequences that people can face just by having this charge, just by having been charged with domestic terrorism. That's such a charged word in so many ways. And so, they know exactly what they're doing. They know that they don't need charges to stick when you can have a case hanging over your head for years that completely interrupts your ability to live your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in the worst case scenario, if these charges do stick, it's 5 to 20-year prison sentences and the seizure of financial assets, which can bankrupt individuals and bankrupt organizations as well. So the Atlanta Solidarity Fund, they're targeting them. They're trying to make it impossible to protect and defend the people who are exercising their First Amendment rights. It's so insane. So wrong.
Yeah. Blatant.
Yeah. In the broad light of day. So I wanted to pivot a little bit to talking about the recent action where activists from the Faith Coalition entered the Cop City site, chained themselves to a bulldozer, and issued their own stop work order to pause construction of Cop City. Can you talk a little bit about that, what happened, and kind of why they are using those tactics right now?
Yeah. So I was not there in person, but it was, just 2 days after these RICO charges came out. And again, the point of the RICO indictment is not just to go after individuals. It's to try to make sure that no one else, will be willing to participate in this movement. It's to tell you that if you oppose Cop City, you are a criminal and we're going to come after you.
Yeah.
And so, that's clearly one of their hopes in this indictment. And instead, 2 days later, this incredibly courageous group of people go into the construction site and chain themselves, to the construction equipment and say, we are issuing a people's stop work order. You cannot continue. This is devastating for our community and we're not going to stand by it. And I think, for me, it was so meaningful to see people of faith and some of these clergy standing there, within the radical tradition of faith leaders, which is not most of the faith tradition, but, this radical tradition of faith leaders taking a stand, is really powerful. And not only did, they halt construction for that morning, but all 5 people were arrested and were taken to jail. And that night, people were standing outside the jail in a solidarity rally, making clear to their comrades inside that they wouldn't be left behind. And, again, that's the exact sort of solidarity that's laid out in this indictment as like proof of, some sort of conspiracy. And again, of course, it's bogus. But I think people are showing that just because you call solidarity a crime, that doesn't make it a crime. And we are going to continue to show up for each other, even though it's a decentralized movement, even though you have no idea what was about to happen. I had no idea that there was going to be an action. And yet, once it happens, we're going to show up for each other. And so I just think it's a really powerful sort of defiant act to say, people are not going to be scared out of taking action.
Yeah, I want to raise my glass to the activists, the faith leaders who are doing this. I mean, that is so freaking brave right now when people are facing these massive charges. They are putting their lives on the line and risking so much for this movement.
Right.
And to make the statement when it needs to be made that we are not going to be intimidated by this shit.
Right. And I'll say, so they all this morning got signature bonds, so they'll all be getting out of jail, which is really, really great.
Awesome. Amazing. Yeah. You shared something about the People's RICO. So in kind of response to these RICO charges that just came down, there has been this other announcement that the people of Atlanta are coming together to file RICO. Well, I don't know exactly what the extent of this action is going to be and if they're actually filing it. But yeah, can you explain what this is?
Yeah, so I didn't have any part in making it, but I think it's thepeoplesrico.com or thepeoplesrico.org or something like that. My understanding of it is that it's sort of this like parody project that is also a political education tool. And if you watch the video, it sets out what a lot of people in the movement have been saying for a long time, which is that every accusation that the state has made against the movement is ultimately just a projection because it is the state and all of these corporate and private and public actors who are the actual ones engaged in the conspiracy of capitalism to push forward Cop City. And you can look at like smoking gun type evidence where we uncovered emails where the CEO of the Atlanta Police Foundation emails the mayor's people and is like, hey, if you don't push this forward, these corporate actors I represent are, going to throw themselves behind this secession movement. And so, there are some of these like active behind the scenes, we're really pushing this and we're going to leverage all of this, private power in order to make this happen. Mm-hmm. But there's also just like the basic way the system functions. Like, I don't think the point of the project is to say like, this is all really secret and behind the table. It's saying like, look at how our system works. Capitalism is the conspiracy. Cop City is the conspiracy. The only actors who are, colluding together in order to push through a massively unpopular project that is destroying the planet and, furthering the violence of policing is these powerful actors. And they're the ones who are filing the conspiracy charges. And so I think it's a way to help people understand, again, that every accusation is really just a projection, and it's what the state is doing itself. It's the Atlanta Police Foundation, the city council, the mayor. It's these various corporate entities like the Atlanta Committee for Progress. It's the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is our main media outlet that is owned by one of the corporations funding Cop City. It's just this entire web of actors at the top where if you actually want to talk about an enterprise that works together, to achieve its aims, that's the enterprise. And, the enterprise is not a bunch of abolitionists, students, educators, neighbors, anarchists, communists, faith leaders, a bunch, people who just live around the area. Them trying to stop Cop City, that's not the enterprise. That's not the conspiracy. Cop City is the conspiracy.
Yeah. Yeah, you have this totally decentralized movement of people acting, of their own volition. And then you have this totally organized collaboration between departments and everything, like much more of an actual organized enterprise right there.
Right. I just want to be clear for anyone listening, I don't think that the point of, that parody political education project is to say that, we're going to bring criminal charges against the state, or, I think many of us are skeptical of the idea of we're going to use, the tools of prosecution. I think it's, that the point is to show that actually just the basic way that our system functions is inherently anti-democratic. It is inherently in service of this powerful network of actors that is not the people. And I think that's really, what people are trying to highlight.
Yeah, that's so important right now. I mean, especially right now when the whole country is trying to understand what RICO is, everyone is their eyes are all on RICO. I mean, part of when I heard that these charges had just dropped and that they had dropped after the Trump charges, the Trump RICO charges, I was like, they're trying to bury this. They're trying to make it so that no one hears about RICO charges for protesters, which is just insanity. And instead, they're just focusing on Trump because Trump is just the big thing that everyone always wants to talk about. But I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about the timing of these charges? We knew they were coming since March or something, or maybe earlier.
Right. Yeah. I mean, people from the Atlanta Solidarity Fund and Community Movement Builders and the Civil Liberties Defense Center had warned back, I think, in February of this year, that they had gotten intel that these charges were coming. And so, the fact of the charges themselves, even though it's outrageous, is not a surprise. I do think there are things in the content, the scope that they're undertaking of basically, again, criminalizing any abolitionist movement is a huge deal. But yeah, I mean, I think that for one, it's notable that, same grand jury that indicted Trump and co, handed down this indictment. I think that there's a lot, it could be, this at this time for a lot of reasons. One of the ones, that seems likely to me is that this referendum campaign has collected, I want to say 112,000 signatures. That's more people than voted for any candidate in the last mayoral election. That's over double the number, that voted for our current mayor. And so I think that these powerful actors know that they are not going to win this thing in the court of public opinion. And so they are going all in trying to win it in, the criminal courts. And, like we just talked about with the protests that have already happened since those charges, they're not, it's not going to work. They're not going to be able to scare people away from taking action. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a sign of desperation. I think it's a way that they're trying to take control of the narrative again, because they know that they've lost it.
Yeah.
Every time the movement has grown and become stronger, they've upped their repression. So, it went from charging people with criminal trespass to charging people with domestic terrorism. And then, once they called people domestic terrorists, they marched into the forest and they murdered Tortuguita in cold blood and said it was because Tort was a domestic terrorist. Then we had mass arrests, 23 people at once charged with domestic terrorism. Then the bail fund organizers have their door kicked down by SWAT, people working at a nonprofit. And so, they've just continually escalated. And this is the latest escalation because, again, I think that they know that they're not going to win this thing in public opinion because you don't get 112,000 signatures if people support Cop City. You just don't.
Absolutely not. And they saw those public comment periods where it's 99% from what I saw, and I sat there the whole time, 99% of people in support are against Cop City, so, just a couple people that look like plants coming and being like, oh no, I want it. Thank you for talking about that and kind of clarifying, because the People's RICO, I wasn't quite sure what to make of it. I love the strategy though for kind of doing some satire and raising awareness at the same time. Really, really fucking smart.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to highlight about these RICO charges before we just kind of go to talking about how folks can help?
Yeah, I think I'll just say that something that's important to understand, I think, is that, for one, people have already made the connections between what's happening in Atlanta and what's happening elsewhere, where, it's the corporations supporting Cop City are nationwide. And that's why you've seen people taking actions all across the country, all across the world. People have already made the connections that, what happens in Atlanta with Cop City matters for everywhere. And I think that's only more true with every passing day as we're seeing more and more facilities that are like Cop City proposed. So there was, of course, Cop Academy in Chicago in 2017 and 2019, I think. Then there's Cop City in Atlanta. Just in the Atlanta metro area, there's one in Fulton, Coweta County, in Sandy Springs. There's been, proposals in Ohio, in Pittsburgh, in Baltimore, Texas, Hawaii. There's the National Guard base expansion in Michigan. These are popping up all over the country, and they're doing it because we are, in ever more unstable times, and manufactured instability, manufactured by capitalism, and all the actors behind it, as we continually degrade the planet and accelerate climate disaster. And I think people need to understand that Cop City is the climate disaster plan for powerful people, having police forces, that are going to control the masses in times of increasing instability. That is the plan. And, the RICO charges are part of that, saying that people fighting for their lives, people fighting for a future are actually engaged in this fictitious criminal enterprise. That's another part of the plan. And so I think that if you are someone who wants a livable future, if you're someone who, is currently fighting for a better world or will someday, this implicates you. And because, they're coming for anyone who's challenging the status quo.
Yeah. And I mean, it's really not even just leftists. I mean, if you're on the right and you want to protest something, your right to protest is at risk. It's we should all be enraged by this and ready to support these folks, even if you don't agree with their specific struggle, because it's going to affect all of us down the line. So I just want to kind of open the door for you to talk about like how people can help, both the defendants in this RICO case, or with the referendum effort, or showing up to the movement. Any ways that you think that people should get plugged in?
Yeah, for sure. So, the Atlanta Solidarity Fund continues to operate with all of these indictments. Certainly there's a need for donations, in order to get people bailed out. They will be needed. Support is needed on the legal front. So, if you're part of a legal organization or connected to one that, is in Georgia, great. If not, there are still ways for outside organizations to help. And I believe the Southern Center for Human Rights is helping coordinate representation for criminalized protesters. We're always in need of more information and, intel about what is happening. Everything in Atlanta happens behind closed doors, and local grassroots abolitionist press like the Atlanta Community Press Collective is doing really important work in actually uncovering what's going on. And so, you can donate to the Atlanta Press Collective. I think spread the word.
Yeah.
Julian Kilrose made this point a week or so ago, that one of the most effective ways of getting this out is just person-to-person conversations. For years, people have been canvassing in the area around the forest. They've been canvassing in supermarket parking lots. They've just been, sort of word of mouth telling people about what is happening. And it's worth doing that no matter where you are. It's worth sitting down and reading the indictment with some people and, understanding the stakes of what is happening here and what could be, coming for you or anyone else next.
Yeah.
And then otherwise, I think just like looking out for calls to action. So, just even in the last day, one of the folks who was arrested after the protest was being denied medication and denied food. And, I think there was a call in, in order to support them and make sure that they got what they needed. And so there are various accounts on Twitter that will often share these calls to action. I'm sure you can find them with the Stop Cop City hashtag. Yeah, so that's a lot of ways. But in general, I think any and all solidarity is appreciated, and, continue to spread the word.
Yeah, and especially with this movement, which is so all about kind of employing a diversity of tactics. Like, there's so much that you can bring to the table, even if you're like making art about the movement and spreading the word through your art or something like that, like this. I love the way that everyone has been included. Everyone's skills have been employed in this beautiful, beautiful effort to resist this violent police training facility.
Totally.
So where can folks find you? And like, you have written so many beautiful, beautiful pieces about this movement. I kind of want to just give a little plug about your work. Sure.
You can find me on Twitter at Micah in ATL. And I do share a lot. You can also go to at Atlanta_press, and that's the Atlanta Community Press Collective. They share a ton of information, really critical updates on the movement. Of course, the Defend the Atlanta Forest account, which is supposedly this criminal organization, as opposed to just a Twitter account that shares information, often shares updates. And so, I would go to any of those places, and that will lead you to more.
Awesome. And then you also wrote a primer on the Cop City movement, and I really highly recommend that everyone go read that. It's really, really well written. I love the way that you think and the way that you lay your thoughts out. So I think everyone would enjoy reading that. So,
Thank you. And I'll use that opportunity to shout out Scalawag. Scalawag is where that piece was published. They're a Southern abolitionist magazine that has also done a bunch of really great reporting on this movement and the crisis that's happening in prisons in the South. And so I would also, you can find that piece at Scalawag, and you can read some of their other stuff too.
Awesome. Thank you. I love that you're always pivoting to plugging other people, getting people plugged into these other important things. It's great. But I really, really appreciate this time with you, Micah, and like all of the work that you are doing to shine light on this movement and continue the struggle. I'm just in awe and really grateful to you.
Oh. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Of course. I hope we'll have you back.
Yeah, for sure. This is great. And thank you for amplifying the cause. I think this is one of the ways that, we get the word out and we let people know. So really appreciate you, covering this consistently.
Awesome. Well, thank you. That means a lot. Hey, everyone. Thank you all for tuning into this episode. If you value the work that we're doing, we would deeply appreciate your support. This project involves a huge amount of research, networking, content creation, and editing. You can lend a hand by giving us a rating and writing a review, or you can contribute financially by signing up on Patreon. To all of our existing patrons, thank you so goddamn much. Your support makes a huge difference for this anti-capitalist project. Much love to you all. Cheers and solidarity.